Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, What Do Students Need to Be Successful in the Workforce? My name is Stephanie Short, and I'm from America Succeeds, a nonprofit committed to improving equity, access, and opportunity in education. We are uniquely positioned between business and the education policy sector, acting as an education voice to business nationally and a business voice for education at the state level. I'm excited to moderate today's discussion as we continue the long, ongoing conversation across the sector about what students need to be successful in the workforce. But we've got a new lens: durable skills. In an era where technology is evolving at an unprecedented pace and employees are asked to constantly learn and adapt, there's an important set of durable soft skills that can power an entire career. In a research project with Emsi, our team is working to better define durable skills and analyze how those skills are in demand across the country in different states and industry sectors, regardless of educational attainment. It is our belief that students will be better prepared for the future of work and more resilient in the face of ever-going change if they start to build durable skills within the K-12 system. We can't rely on postsecondary institutions alone to meet the demand. So for the policymakers in attendance at this year's conference, there's an opportunity to improve existing state college and career readiness standards without creating something entirely new. So with that, I want to dig into our discussion and introduce today's panelists. We have Rob Sentz from Emsi, Josh Fraser-Sparks from the Walmart Foundation, and Charles Fadel from the Center for Curriculum Redesign. I want to say thank you all for joining us today. And Rob, I would really like to start with you. Business leaders have long lamented the talent gap, and Emsi not only has incredible understanding of that gap, but insights into what we can do to close it. So from your perspective, what skills do students need to succeed in the workforce today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think it goes back to sort of what we've known, for a long time about education and the role that it plays in work. With so much focus on things like technical skills and STEM, things like coding and cybersecurity and data science and programming, all that kind of stuff. I think we've gotten so focused on those really highly technical needs in the market, and those are pretty intimidating. And everybody feels like I got to go, get really good at math and all these, advanced technologies. And I think there's certainly a place and a huge need for those things. But I think the message is that when we look at the job postings that are out today, and we look at where employers are really needing people, especially when we think about, young folks coming up into the labor market, it's the human skills that really matter. The 100% of all postings that you can look at. So we look at hundreds of millions of job postings. 100% of them mention a core human skill. And when I say that, I mean a skill often referred to as a soft skill, but these are things that are classically and traditionally associated with that core education that we all get in that K through 12 time, plus what we get in our, the core curriculum that we get in post-secondary education. And more specifically, what I mean by that is our ability to really, I think it's a key set of we might say there's 6 key things there, and Charles probably has a lot more to add to this, but it's things like your ability to communicate, and that's communicate written and orally, and that manifests in things like presentations. It's your ability to lead and manage. And obviously, when you're a young person coming up into the labor market, you're not leading and managing quite yet, but the capacity to lead and manage. And so that's something that a lot of young people gain through, things like activities and sports and being in classroom settings. And then the next set would be sort of that critical thinking and problem solving. So if I were to boil it down, communication, leadership and management, problem solving, and critical thinking. And there's obviously a lot more that goes into that, but every single job, I don't care if it's a cashier or a brain surgeon, needs those core human skills. So that's how I'd kind of say it to people in the K through 12 setting. What you're providing is a foundation that everything builds on top of.
I love that. I think we've kind of framed it in terms of how you use what you know, how you communicate what you know, and how you get other people to rally around your ideas and what you know. Now, Josh, I would love to move to you next. So give us a sense of what that looks like, kind of human skills and technical skills at a global employer like Walmart.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. You know, I think before I start talking about workforce development, I want to talk about me being a teacher, an 8th grade middle school teacher. And so I remember first year teaching, hot mess, right? And so I would put kids in groups and say, hey, go solve this big problem. And then I would walk around the room, and what you would see is some kids doing some work and then some students not. And so then when I dug into that, I really figured out students want to participate, they want to be successful, but at times they don't have the skills to do this. And what I'm talking about are those durable skills, those essential skills, those 21st century skills, whatever we want to call them, but they're not soft skills. They're actually critical skills to be successful. And so as a teacher, once I started thinking about, okay, I taught science, the Krebs cycle is important, but ultimately, when you graduate high school, do you need to memorize and know what the Krebs cycle does for your life? Or do you actually need to know how to communicate, how to work across lines of difference, how to present meaningful information accurately? Like, those are the skills that I wanted my kids to have, regardless if they learned anything about science or not. And so I spent a lot of time in the K through 12 sector. And then when I came to Walmart, it was a big shift to workforce development. And what I realized is it's actually all the same. We need to stop siloing K through 12, workforce development, higher ed. Ultimately, we're all striving for the same thing. And with that, I think, comes this piece of narrative change. So if you were to ask my 8th grade students, what's your goal here? Why do you show up to school every day? Their goal will be to graduate, to earn a diploma. And then if you go into workforce development and you ask someone, why are you showing up to an upskilling or training opportunity? Their answer would be to get a certificate. And then if you ask them, well, what's after that? They'd be like, oh, I got this certificate. I got this diploma. I'm good. And ultimately, what we know is the shelf life of skills, they don't last very long these days. And so we need to go from a upskilling education is a destination to upskilling and education is actually a journey that you're going to be on the rest of your life. And so embracing this new narrative of lifelong learning is pivotal. And I think our work at Walmart is really trying to do that, to really change the narrative of, like, you can get a job, get a credential, you can move up, but no matter what, you're going to have to be a lifelong learner. And the skills that enable you to be a lifelong learner are those durable skills, because every day you are learning if you're problem solving, if you're working across lines of difference in our stores. And so a few ways we've really tried to operationalize that is two big initiatives. One was our Walmart Academy, where we set up 200 academies across the country, where our associates go to really level set on both the technical skills they need for their job, but also these critical, durable skills that they need that they're going to have to be adaptable to every day when they show up in their position. And then also we launched our Live Better You program, which is our $1 a day degree or credentialing or certificate or diploma program. Because I think one of the things that we really embrace is multiple pathways. There's no one pathway that will make someone the most successful. There are multiple pathways. And so really trying to shift that narrative around, you need to be a lifelong learner. You're going to be constantly learning. There are multiple pathways to get there. And ultimately, I think if you were to chat with a lot of managers at Walmart in terms of how they hire, they would say, actually, we really look for those durable skills. We want people who can be an agility player, who can come in, who can learn, and all of that. And if you have those skills, we can train you on the technical through either Live Better You or through our academy system. And so that's the perspective I'm bringing. I think we need to stop thinking about, testing as a test reinforce this notion that learning is a destination. Either you get it or you don't, as opposed to how do we embrace more of it's a journey, and let's work together on that journey. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Josh. I love that. I know we have talked a lot on our team and kind of across the sector, right? That the purpose of education has really changed to focus on that agency, that lifelong learning mindset. And at the end of that journey, underneath teaching students how to think critically and collaborate and use the knowledge that they've accumulated, it is ultimately to help them find a meaningful, fulfilling way to contribute to their community and the world around them, right? And so that end goal is something that I think we can all rally around in this conversation. And that's actually a great segue. Charles, I would love to turn to you here and your perspective from the Center for Curriculum Redesign, because I know you've done a lot of work in kind of the big piece. If we all agree that the purpose of education has changed, what's next? Like, how do we go about actually shifting this in the classroom?
Certainly. Well, thank you, Stephanie. And I resonate a lot with what Josh and Rob have said, of course. It's we're at a very fascinating point here. Let me just wear two hats simultaneously. One, which you see here, which is my work with the OECD as chair of the Business Advisory Committee to the OECD in Europe, and then what we're doing as a center. So first of all, there's this conflict of terminology that the two other panelists have brought up, which is technical skills versus quote unquote lifelong skills. And yes, there are thousands of technical skills, and school does not teach you how to be everything. It doesn't teach you to be a welder and an attorney and a painter, et cetera, et cetera. No, it teaches you the basics that can be then transversally used to become better at both expertise and your lifelong capabilities. So a skill set in education, 21st century skills, are about knowledge. Yes, you still need knowledge, even with AI. But you also need skills like critical thinking and curiosity, and critical thinking and creativity and communication, collaboration. But you also need character qualities like curiosity and resilience, etc. And finally, you need to continue learning how to learn, and that's the meta-learning aspect, metacognition, learning how to learn, lifelong learning. So that's what schools should be preparing you for, not specifically a given job, which may disappear throughout your career or morph significantly. And if you look at what we've been asking, even in the US, from the conference board perspective, I'm a senior fellow there, the AMA and SHRM and others, everybody agrees these are the higher order thinking skills that are required. If you go now, here we did an employee survey, 48 employer organizations, basically the chambers of commerce of 48 countries, US included. And this is what they said they would like to see. No surprise, ethics and leadership and so on, as some of us have been saying here. And if you look at ONET, just a very cursory look into ONET shows that, yes, knowledge still matters, but above and beyond that, we also need skills and character quality that are useful for every job. So the moniker 21st century skills, which I contributed to, this is my first book, has had success around the world. But then it comes to, and now what do? We all agree that in one way, shape, or form, these things are needed. Josh, as a former teacher, I'm sure he would have tried to embed these things into the learning of science. And that's what we've developed. We've developed how to embed and teach within the disciplines some of these skills and character qualities. Typically, when other organizations try to do this, they send a bunch of PDFs to their teachers and say, and good luck to you. Here we've developed an entire PD, professional development system, to make sure that the teachers know how to do this in the context of fractions or in the context of the Krebs cycle, etc. So as you can imagine, it's a lot of fun actually learning this way. Lastly, people will object, well, is this measurable? And I'm like, yes, of course it's measurable. It's just not measurable in a summative, punitive sort of way. The same we do 360-degree measurements with employees and so on in corporations. We can do teachers' evaluations, we could do student self-evaluations, we could do situational judgment tests, we can even infer their behavior out of digital signatures that when they're using applications. There are all sorts of ways to measure in a formative, non-punitive way and really help the students become the best at what they can be. So that's, of course, all of this needs refinements because we need to go seamlessly, as Josh and Rob were saying, from the world of life and work all the way down to education. So we need to refine some of these parameters, but it's perfectly doable. It's just a question of will and determination over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's it.
Thank you, Charles. Really helpful. And I'll get us back up here. Great. Appreciated on so many levels, right? I think one thing we've talked about that's interesting is that as we think through some of those more character skills, like resilience, for example, that's not something that we would traditionally see in a job description. But certainly, given the last now 8, 9, 10 months of COVID, it's something that's been on the top of everyone's mind as we think about how are we adapting and evolving and resilient in the face of change. And so I'd like to kind of circle back with all of you. There's this larger conversation that's happening about durable skills, but we're also in a moment of COVID and the pandemic. And so how can we think about durable skills in the context of COVID? How is that changing in the workplace? How is that shifting our work? And are there lessons learned from this moment about resiliency and durable skills that we can carry forward?
I can jump in with just a quick example at Walmart. So pre-pandemic, our e-commerce business and our pickup business was really growing. We have close to, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but we had close to about 4,800 stores across the country. And pre-pandemic, I want to say the number that was providing those either pickup delivery services that people ordered online on our app was close to 1,000. So maybe 25% of the chain had those. And those jobs are really, you have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, and you have to be tech savvy with digital skills because everything, you have a handheld device, every order comes through there. You go, it routes you through the store to make sure you have the most efficient way to pick whatever you need to. And then it dings you when your customer's there and you deliver those groceries to the car. So it's very tech savvy. You have to be flexible. You also have to have great customer service skills to get people coming back using that service. And when the pandemic hit, I think we went somewhere from like 1,000 stores providing that service to almost 3,000. So almost 25% to 75%. And what that means is a lot of people have to upskill really rapidly. And so within, and in using our academy infrastructure, what can happen is we can roll out any change initiative to all 1.2 million associates within 2 weeks. And so you have to have the infrastructure to make sure you can deliver learning, but you also have to have the mindset of learning. And then you also have to have the purpose to serve the customer, to grow your skills and also grow in your career. So I think just in total, it really pushed us in our digital transformation. There's no time to wait, and we have to make sure we're developing those skills in our associates.
If I may chime in, one of the key issues, key advantages, if one can say there's an advantage out of a pandemic, really, is that people were forced to do things that before would have gone under the radar. So you're right, corporations would not have said resilience is really important. But look at the hidden data. You probably didn't notice, but in the ONET bar chart I was showing, resilience was at the top one. Why? Because of the things that Josh was talking about. If you're not going to even show up for work because you got upset the day before, or if you're not going to show up for work because you're afraid or whatever, that is a necessary, not sufficient condition. You have to show up. You have to continue performing. And so resilience ranks very high, even though from an HR perspective, we would not have thought pre-COVID to put that into the list of requirements. But it is in there when you analyze what the jobs require out of Emsi or ONET databases.
Rob, do you have anything to add? Because I know in particular your team, the resilience report and kind of changes in COVID. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, most of what our observations have been is sort of an acceleration of things that are already happening. I like the Walmart example. We certainly use the online shopping feature, and it's dramatic how quickly our local store adapted from one thing to another. So that's definitely there. I think. I mean, as we talk, my biggest observation in all this is that the strain and stress that it's putting on young people, and how much it's forcing us to independent learn and learn in isolation. And I think it's actually extremely dangerous, what we're doing right now from a policy point of view, really because of fear. But the strain and stress that it's putting on young workers and young people, young learners, is unprecedented. And I think people who can do well in that setting will thrive. If I'm the sort of person who can hop on YouTube and my teacher talked about this, I went and figured it out myself. I know I have employees that I really value that type of person who, if I'm talking, if I'm being fast or talking about a project at work and they're not quite sure what it is and they go figure it out themselves. It could be like a graphic design thing. It could be a writing thing. It could be a coding thing. That's really incredible and really, really valuable. But to force so many people through that so quickly is interesting and concerning. And I think that's the acceleration. So it's like, I don't really feel like everything we've already been doing is still there. We've just started to accelerate things on people. And I don't know how many of them are ready for that.
Rob, that's a great point. And I think that's the purpose of being in ed reform generally, is that we believe we have to be able to get there and do it for every student. There's a call to get there and do it for every student. And in this moment, beyond the incredible stress, the need for SEL, the digital divide, kind of all of the things we're up against in rolling this back, I think it also underscores the importance that every student needs these skills. If every student had the durable skills and the agency, the shifting back and forth between remote and hybrid learning and the things happening there wouldn't be as rough and tough on families, because students would have those core skills. As a reminder to those who are listening in, we will be taking questions from the audience. Definitely pop them into the chat as they come up. But that's kind of a question I wanted to throw back to the panel. One thing, Josh, you mentioned that this is a full spectrum effort. So it's the employers, it's workforce development, it's certainly post-secondary institutions. But when it comes to K-12, I think there's a really important piece about not conflating the technical skills with the durable and human skills that we're talking about. As advocates, we've made the mistake historically that different business industry associations and others all go to the governor's office and they're all hounding on the skills that you need. And they're kind of all asking for different slices of things. And so it's really hard to respond if you're thinking about the K-12 system. So what are your thoughts on how we can sort of think about maybe higher level technical skills? Digital literacy is certainly something that comes to mind, but separating out those human skills, those durable skills, from what we're talking about in terms of developing the technical skills needed to succeed today. Charles.
Well, both can be done simultaneously. I mean, obviously, you need to learn modern disciplines. I mean, even within biology, why so much time on, descriptive biology and so little time on biotechnology, right? It's a choice we're making in terms of curricula. You can introduce computer science in all sorts of ways, from optional all the way to embedded in other disciplines. So there are plenty of ways to embed those more generic disciplines that cut across a number of potential employability fields. That's one aspect. Digital literacy is the ability to manipulate the tools that you have at your disposal. That's almost an adult problem more than it is a kid problem. A lot of kids have that digital literacy already Where they fall flat is doing a proper PowerPoint presentation. That they don't know how to do. But to download an app and figure out an app, they know how to do. So we have to be clear about whose problem we're solving, the older adults or the younger kids. But overall, it's really a question of developing this matrix of, disciplines on one side, skills/character on the other side, and make sure it's embedded throughout in a harmonious way. It's quite doable. I mean, we've been doing it. So it's not a surprise. But for example, Josh would also know that the difficulty levels of these things is, as Stephen Jay Gould would say, a punctuated equilibria system. So we go through a rapid S-curve and we flatten for a while, and another rapid S-curve and we flatten for a while. The flattening allows us time to breathe and digest. So I know that we're all going through this acceleration part of the curve, but trust me, in 4 or 5 months, the vaccines will have taken care of a lot of that, slowed us down, and hopefully we'll keep the memory of what we have missed. Because the problem of crises is that people all of a sudden realize that they need something. And at that point, you don't have 5 years to develop all these qualities that you seek. They should have been done 5 to 10 years ago, to 20 years ago. All of a sudden, you're looking for a tourniquet, not a long-term solution. So we have to keep in mind, not just the tourniquet aspect, but the long-term solution we're trying to engender. And that's the hard part. People will get bored, the fear will fade away. It's our job to make sure we stick with it.
Hey, Charles, I would love to piggyback off of that, because I couldn't agree more that technical skills and durable skills, they're not false binaries. They can come together neatly together. And I think I've been out of the K through 12 game since the mid 2000s. So what I'm about to say, maybe K through 12 is doing, but what I've seen, particularly at workforce boards across the country, and particularly at some of the more innovative community colleges across the country, is using badges for these skills. And they embed those badges within their curriculum. So if you were taking, a business leadership course, and throughout that you were working on specific projects that lead to getting this digital badge. And in most cases, that badge is yours. It doesn't go in a transcript. It goes into your digital backpack, and you can take it with you wherever you go. And so the conversation around that really is, how do we make sure skills carry currency in the labor market? And it goes back to your point around, how do we verify those skills? And so those skills can be verified in lots of different ways, but we have to have the data infrastructure and system to make sure wherever those badges come from for those skills, they're interoperable among many different employers, and they're either learning management systems or talent management systems or whatever. And so I've seen a lot of innovation there, but then also a lot of large national companies are beginning to launch, in states, Colorado as one example, launching learning and employment records. That is a digital, it keeps track of everything you've learned, worked, and earned, and skills along the way. So it's like your one-stop shop for you. And so I think skills are important, but also making sure those skills carry currency in the labor market, if we want to increase economic mobility for folks, is key too. And that's the hard part. And I'm just not sure what's going on in K through 12.
Yeah.
Well, if I may respond, I apologize. But very quickly, though, sure, you can get credentials and they're going to be portable. That's great. What we're missing, though, is a quality, assurance aspect. When you go to a university, you get the quality assurance to the type of degree, the level of the degree, and the brand of the university. Right? Here, we don't have that. So when we say, for example, okay, you've taken a philosophy course, does that necessarily make you a better critical thinker? Right? So the presence of something doesn't mean that it has been absorbed and changed someone's behavior. So we aspire to not just the presence of an activity, but the effectiveness of the activity into modifying your behavior. We can actually do that now. But until now, it has literally been a question of presence. Hey, I've taken pole jumping, therefore I must be courageous. Okay, but will you be courageous if you're doing something else than pole jumping? Has it transferred?
And to add to Josh, to your observation here on the learning and employment records and things like badges and open skills network, that the primary contribution that Emsi's been trying to make here is, we've collected, 100 million plus documents on the demand side, so the posting, 100 million plus on the supply side, so like things like resumes and profiles. And then we've been doing, first a lot to map curriculum to the skills that are being expressed on that supply and demand side, because we think one of the things that we can start to do, we don't think this is the end all be all, but to help curriculum and the people gaining it to articulate some of those things they've gained. Because, for instance, if I like Charles's illustration of PowerPoint, if a job posting is very explicit on, we want a strong communicator, someone who's good at giving presentations in front of the executive team, and the student or even the faculty, whoever it is who's involved with their life, looks at that and is able to quickly translate in our rhetoric class, or in our English class, or in our psychology, whatever it was we were taking. We spent a lot of time talking about how to build the right sort of talking point and headline, and how to build that argument, and how to build the slide even. That student, that person, whoever it is, can quickly take that skill from the curriculum and translate it straight over into the interview. And that can happen in a badge. That can happen in somebody's learning and employment record, where they can start to look across at the skills being asked for, and say, these are things that I was taught, and these are things that we really discussed, and I'm going to tell you how I understand that. So with skills, we can use skills as a language translation piece, because a student does not have the same language of business, but if we can start to give it to them via the curriculum they've taken and via the people in their life helping them, then when they're in that conversation and in the interview, when they're making that resume, they can signal. So we think skills is just a great signaling tool, because I think the thing is the employer values it, but home, school, and work don't share all the same language. So that's what we're trying to do with all the data, is just create that. It's not the end all be all, but if we can put it in an LER, a badge, in a curriculum, whatever, then that person shows up at that conversation in a way more effective way. I like the word effectiveness here.
Well, one reason why we're able to have this conversation is because I'm a former electrical engineer, right? Is because we have this very, very exacting taxonomy and ontology of the technology itself, the specification, how my voice and my video are being compressed, at what rate, how is it being transferred throughout all the routers and popping up on the other side, decompressed, all that. It's exacting specifications. That's why we have this cohesion. But we don't have this. We have a Tower of Babel situation in education, in workforce, and so on. Both sides don't talk to each other, and when they do, they use 60,000 different, ontologies. And yet, it's so easy to condense them to the essentials. And that's what we need to do here. It's not rocket science. It's just a question of an effort. And then after that, we can line up a lot of things behind it, like college entrance requirements and so on.
Yeah, and just to bring a different perspective, I think at Walmart, we deeply feel learning can happen anywhere. It can happen in formal settings like schools and community colleges, but it definitely happens on the job, and definitely happens through volunteerism. And so one project that really popped up recently was the South Bend Lifelong Learning Initiative called Bendable. And what they did is they trained community ambassadors. So think pastors, think counselors, think police officers, think people who are just really active in their community to really understand these durable skills. And when people show them, how to really verify that they know how to do them. And so several employers in South Bend signed on to Bendable. They use Bendable for their LMS system, but they also use Bendable for their talent pipeline system. And so when these community ambassadors badge a student in a school or someone through volunteerism for a skill, employers automatically receive that through the Bendable system. And so I think thinking differently about when, how, where learning can occur, and how do we capture that, to Rob's point, and make sure that signaling works is hard, but it is doable. And I think we're all probably on this call thinking about scaling. Like how does it actually scale outside of a city of about 100,000? So.
Yeah. It makes a lot of learning. And I think where a lot of this is headed is what things sort of become commodities in education. Like I'll just go learn that somewhere. I'll just, it's something that's offered at work. It's something I can go pick up at the local community college. Oh, I signed up. Here's this new online learning provider. I'm just going to go get that. And it sort of like creates interesting commodity. I think the struggle that we have is how do you get those, like, what are certain things that you can turn into commodities that you can go gain? And what are some things that are just like inherent and so valuable about education that are like intangible? It's hard to make that a commodity.
Well, one way of thinking about it is the difference between education and training. Employers are asking for training, but they're using the word education. They should be asking for training. And education is broad and partially deep. Training is deep.
Yeah, there's a time element. There's a richness to one. Yeah.
Right. By the way, just noticed that one of our participants is a Mr. Krebs himself. Josh, you should be pleased. Will Krebs. So welcome.
I love it. So many important threads that I would call out, not only because they line up with our perspectives and beliefs about how we should be tackling this problem, right? Learning everywhere, the opportunities for credentialing and mastery. Certainly that plays a role in terms of college and career readiness standards and just setting the high expectations at the state level to position education systems to meet that expectation. So I'd love to kind of dig in. There's a few questions coming into the chat that we'll get to in a moment, but wanted to call out with that last piece, the distinction between training and education. And Rob, it reminds me of part of the resiliency report from your team that stuck with me is just the importance of developing a T-shaped employee today. And I think that there's a role for K-12 to play in developing that T, and there's a role for higher ed and training partners and employers to play in developing that T. But I'd love to get sort of your sense in the concept first. Can you share for the audience what we're talking about, what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, the T-shape, I mean, that's not something that, that's been around for a long time. The way that, there's a couple ways to look at it, but, I think first and foremost, Emsi is a company that generally deals with more of the technical aspect of things, right? We are harvesting information, at that skill level, the job level, and using that to help community colleges, workforce boards, employers understand sort of like the molecules of work and what people need to do. And I want to clearly say that, like, I think that's important, but the more that we look at work, the more that I go back to what education was originally founded on is so important. And I don't want to have a revolutionary mindset with regard to education, right? I do not think that, like, if anything, we need to return to the roots, so to speak, meaning that so much of the value of education for young people is laying down a rigorous, essential foundation that they can build on top of through their working life. And that goes back to things that people a long time in our country, in other countries, realized about education. It's about the creation of character and a free society of people who can move around. And they're not telling them how to do everything, but they're laying the foundation. Now, once you have that strong foundation, there's so much we can do to build on top of it. Like, it's like constructing any kind of building, right? You have a strong foundation, you can put addition on the house. You can, we're going to change things up. We're going to do this differently. And those are all vertical things. Those are all things that you have the freedom to do when you're 40, but it's because you have that strong foundation. And it's hard to go get that. If you don't already have it, it's hard to go get that when you're 40. So I think that's it. Education, I just want to say how important I think that is. Even though we traffic so much in the technical side of things, you have so much more freedom when you have that foundation. And then in the T-shape, we in the paper that we did, we talk a lot about, and like David Epstein's talk about this, Isaiah Berlin, the idea of fox and hedgehog, right? Then you can start to realize, like, I can be a specialist and really thrive, or I can be a generalist. Like, one person can be really a generalist and thrive in the labor market, and one person can be really a specialist and thrive in the labor market, and there's room for everybody. It's like a body, a well-functioning body. We need hands and feet and eyes and ears and noses. Like, we need all of it. But it all needs the same thing.
Your analogies, Rob, and this T-shaped person, I have a visual for it, which is the Swiss Army knife, right? It's not necessarily the best knife. It's not necessarily the best can opener or bottle opener, but it's good to get you there, and then you can make it. You can sharpen that knife when you need to become more of a knife specialist or a bottle opener specialist or whatever. So you have this foundation in you as a Swiss Army knife.
I love both of those and couldn't agree more, right, about just the foundation, and that we need to ensure every kid has the foundation. That is still something we have to be laser focused on in this work. And I want to turn, though, as we're waiting for some more audience questions to come in some of the positive light, I think from our perspective, we've mentioned a few examples that have come up. Josh, you mentioned Bendable. We've called out a couple higher ed partners, but where do we have examples of this happening in the K-12 classroom? Kind of what does it look like? Who can we look to as early examples of this work to prove that this isn't just some pie in the sky idea, right? We can get it done.
Were you asking Josh or?
Any of you?
Oh, well, so there are plenty of small examples nowhere around the world, including Finland, including Singapore, including the PISA champions. No one has done this in a significant way. Can you find here or there a teacher or professor that does some of these things some of the time? Absolutely. Do they find anybody that does this in a deliberate, comprehensive, systematic, explicit, and demonstrable way? You will find nobody. So it depends on what a proof means. We have plenty of small proofs. It's really not complicated. It's really doable. But the scaling part is what has always eluded us, simply because there's no systematic way to do so. And that's where, in essence, a scientific or engineer mindset can come to the fore, because you can systematize, make these processes. But to do so, you have to retrain teachers profoundly on how you do these things. They're really eager. Teachers want to teach you critical thinking. They're not aloof about it. It's just that you cannot just throw a PDF at them and say, I know you're already very busy, but somehow in the week or the day before, you're going to digest all the research, remember everything you learned about Piaget and Vygotsky and whatever, and figure it out on your own in the context of your discipline. And oh, by the way, we're not even going to measure you on, we're not going to measure the kids. So it means we don't really care as an establishment. We're only going to measure on what they have learned, the knowledge piece. So let's be fair here, and that's why I also love Rob's point about we're not trying to create a revolution. This is merely being incrementally ambitious. That's all there is. There's no radical anything here. It's been done for centuries. People have learned to be resilient and have learned to be this and that. It's just that in the past 50 years or so, through the Western world, and then by analogy everybody else, has moved into a situation of teaching mostly knowledge, and if not only knowledge, because it's easy to measure. But as Andreas Schlacker at the OECD says, what's easy to measure is easy to automate. There you have your choice. Do you want to embed facts and figures that are easily searchable, or do you want to embed how to understand the facts and figures? That's really harder to measure. There you go.
I think when it comes to workforce development, especially since COVID hit, there's been an imperative for upskilling. And David Brooks wrote an article not too long ago about the need for radical reskilling and a system that embraces radical reskilling. And so I do believe that we're at a moment of transformation. And if that moment of transformation only happens in workforce development or community colleges and doesn't include K through 12 or the other stakeholders when it comes to education and training, it will fail. But when I think about positive examples, I keep going back to Colorado only because I'm most familiar with it. I'm sure there are other states doing tremendous things, but Colorado has an explicit office that coordinates anything that touches people when it comes to education and workforce. And before any decision can be made in any one system, all the other systems have to know about it and figure out how that is seamless between their systems. So they're really trying to bust down K through 12, higher ed, workforce development, employer sector partnerships, all of that. And so I don't know what that means, but what I do see as successful is you can't think in a silo if you want a system from kindergarten to retirement to work. And so that would be my advice.
There's a couple points here, right? Because we've mentioned both we're in a place of incremental change, but we're also talking about radical transformation. There's always that opportunity to thread the needle. It's my personal opinion, as we're talking about K-12 and the purpose of education and this idea of durable skills and how we prepare our students, what we're really talking about is a shift in culture and a culture change where all of our stakeholders are really bought into this durable skills idea. And then for the folks who participate in EdPalooza and are part of the ExcelinEd network, we can really start to build in the incremental change when it comes to college and career readiness standards, teacher preparation and support, the incremental changes in assessment and accountability. Those changes will always be incremental, but if we can all get on board with the shift that has accelerated, with the major changes in the world that we're living today, we actually do have an opportunity to move the needle on how students have durable skills and how resilient they are in the future. Yes, Charles.
If I may give you a medical analogy, the system has a double occlusion. It needs a double bypass. There's one occlusion at the interface between K-12 and higher ed, and another one between higher ed and workforce. And so these are the two strangle points where things get out of alignment. So the one between higher ed and workforce is relatively easy to solve, because of companies like Emsi and others. We can get there. The one between K-12 and higher ed, it's tougher to solve because the requirements of higher ed are not the requirements of work and life, but they're the ones that drive everything before. And so that's the tough interface that really, really needs to be shaken.
And Charles, I would call out on that point as we talk about college and career readiness standards, right? That's the opportunity to set expectations. And more often than not, I would say most of the time, those standards are being set in conversation between post-secondary institutions and education departments in K-12, and business is not often enough at the table. Their perspective isn't often enough represented, so that we're not thinking of college and career readiness as simply college readiness, that we are, regardless of what someone chooses to do as a post-secondary pathway, that we've prepared them with some career readiness, whether they deploy that immediately after high school or they deploy it after going on and getting credentials and certificates and degrees and additional experience.
Okay, but I'm not going to absolve businesses that easily. First of all, there's a confusion between training and education. They come and they ask for training. No, we're not going to give you someone who speaks exactly the syntax of your technology. Sorry, that's not the job of an education department. Second, they are also fair weather friends of education. When the revenue and profits are great, they show up at the table. When they're not, they forget about you. If they change champions, when I leave XYZ company, no, I don't get replaced because I was the one who had the drive. It was not really the company. It was specific people in a company that have that drive. Fourth, they also send the wrong people to some of these meetings. I will not mention a meeting at the White House a decade ago where I was the only engineer, whereas everybody else was an HR person. And what was on the discussion table? STEM jobs. I'm sorry, I'm the only one who knows anything about STEM. Everybody else was an HR person with a humanities degree. And so everybody else was repeating the mantras everyone else was talking about, like, oh yeah, 4 years of algebra. I was the only one saying, no, we need 2 years of algebra, 1 year of statistics and probabilities, and hey, philosophy, trust me, it will help. So there are plenty of reasons why companies they're impatient, they don't follow through. So I'm going to be pushing back here saying, hey, employers, don't use this. This is a tragedy of the commons, basically. Like, okay, someone else will take care of the problem. No.
Well, and we appreciate that, right? It's certainly why organizations like America Succeeds exist, to catalyze the business community, to bring them to the table as effective champions. It's always a helpful pushback, but it's also really the goal of this conversation and this project, right? Is to get rid of the Tower of Babel, to make sure that when, to your point, business leaders are showing up in conversations, that we've all aligned around durable skills. We've all aligned around the foundations that we're asking for. That's truly the opportunity to make the change and not end up, to your point, in the situation where some people are asking for customer service, some are asking for coding languages, some are asking for certain kind of data, statistics, and mathematics, right? Those pieces are all needed, but K-12 can best respond to the foundation. Now, we have just a little over 5 minutes left, and I think we've covered a lot of the questions in the chat. So I was wondering, I'd love to get kind of some final thoughts from each of you as an eternal optimist, right? Like, what are you most hopeful for? Rather than the problem, what are you most hopeful for if we can solve durable skills and all rally behind this call?
You know, for me, I think this is one of the biggest equity plays our country could embark upon. At Walmart, for philanthropy, our target population are stars. And you can Google the STARS report. It's through Opportunity at Work and Accenture. And there's 71 million people in this country who either have the skills for their next higher wage job, but they can't verify those skills in a way an employer can recognize them, or they need a short-term training program, less than 6 months, to get some more skills to get to that next job. So there's 71 million of those folks right now who are in the labor market, who are ready for that next level, but the system isn't ready to get them to that next level. And so we're putting a lot of our philanthropy in thinking about how do we create this system so people can have access to short-term training programs, which currently Title IV Pell, WIOA, typically they don't fund. So where does that funding mechanism come from? And then also, when we look at that population, out of that 71 million, about 12 million are African American and about 15 million are Latinx. So as we think about the future, and as employers want a diverse talent pipeline, because we know diverse teams, when they're cultivated in an appropriate way, they actually outperform homogenous teams. And so if we're automatically writing off all of those folks and 71 million folks in the country, we're not going to live up to the aspirations we want to when it comes to equity. So for me, I'm doing a lot of thinking about skills isn't just, a nice thing to have for businesses and people. It's actually an imperative to close the gaps that have perpetuated in our country for years. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Josh, because I couldn't have said it better myself. But Rob and Charles, I would love to hear from you. What are you most hopeful for if we can solve this durable skills change for the future?
Rob, after you.
Yeah, I think it's with more awareness of the issue, more a heightened awareness of the value of education and the sort of the need for it in the market. Even in the world of K through 12, I think you'll see more people buy into the idea of, what are the skills that we need to focus on, What are things we can add to our curriculum to make it better? What are things we can try to help our students succeed? So I don't think anybody's really fighting that. I think the problem is they don't know how to. And so there's, even us being in talks like this, there's an eagerness to try things, to experiment, and to bring things in. I think I would say my biggest sort of optimism in this is that I think education needs to be rigorous no matter where it is, right? If it's K through 12, university, something you're doing at work, it needs to be rigorous, and you need to understand that rigor and be able to apply it back to somebody else to talk about its value. So I think that if we can do a good job of showing where the value is in the market, and then people can pick up on that and sort of adopt it and bring it in and help their own students and systems understand how to communicate that back, it draws these sort of Venn diagrams closer together, right? It draws a student closer to a college. It draws a college closer to an employer. It helps reduce distance. So I think I'm optimistic on the reduction of distance between these systems that have a hard time talking to each other, because we're actually here talking about how to make improvements in it.
Well, I'm optimistic in the fact that about 40 to 20 years ago, the focus was on getting to college. In the past 20 or so years, the focus has been on getting into jobs. Mm-hmm. But as Josh mentioned, now the focus is becoming above and beyond all of this, because they're like Russian dolls. They're nested into each other. If you can help the problems of life itself, whether it's equity and equity in the US, equity around the world, or water availability, or whatever mega problem we have as a humanity, you will automatically have the skills and character qualities it takes for your job, and you will automatically get into college if that's what you want to do. It's that simple. But if we derate the system to only measuring traditional mechanisms in traditional ways, we'll only perpetuate the mindset of 40 years ago. So that's the new aspiration here, to solve problems like equity and so on, so that along the way, everything else is taken care of, literally as check marks along the way. It's setting the bar high and reaching it in a plausible way, in a doable way.
Thank you.
I see there's a question we haven't answered from Rebecca Dew in the chat.
Go ahead, Charles. I think that one's for you.
So just very quickly, Rebecca, imagine you and I were using a CAD system, right? Jointly using a CAD system to design a part of something. Well, as we are collaborating, the system can measure a lot of different things about us, how we respond to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the sort of thing you can infer out of digital signatures. So this is a very natural way of inferring various behaviors, not the creepy sort of way where you look at someone's Facebook page or Twitter feed or spy on their emails or whatever. No, this is really above board, fully open, fully measurable systems.
Thank you, Charles, and appreciate the clarification. Rebecca is saying thank you as well. I think with that, right, it's also a great moment for me to say thank you to all of our panelists and for those who are tuning in. I know for me personally, I'm hopeful that through this work, Rob, to your point about bringing together the Venn diagram, Josh, to your point, especially about building a more equitable future in this country, and Charles, just with all of your perspective, that we will get to a place where every student is prepared to succeed in the global economy and contribute to their local community in a meaningful way, right? And so we look forward at America Succeeds to sharing more about this work, what comes from our partnerships, this research, and our efforts. So keep an eye out for updates from Durable Skills in the coming months. And with that, we'll say, have a great day. Thank you all.